We're going to be recorded as always. So welcome to the January board meeting, which is also the membership meeting. And we have a lot of stuff to cover, but I just want to welcome everybody first and call us to order. And let's see here. I think I got everybody. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to do was, there's Adnan. Okay. First thing I wanted to do was to introduce the new and current board members. So everybody would know who we all are, and welcome the newbies and welcome back the returnees. So the current board, after the election that we just had, and I'm just going to do this myself first. I'm Tracy Reisinger. I'm current president, and I may be continuing president once we have the new officers voted in. We also have Mark Barrett, who is Vice President of Operations. Hey, Mark. And we have Deb Brown is the secretary. Doesn't have her picture there, but she's there. And we have Debbie Hall is our treasurer. And we have Joe Casanova, who is our newest member. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, everyone.
And then Susan Cooper. Hey, Susan. And Carrie Fleischer and Adnan Maranovic. And we're missing Joel Phillips, but he may still be coming. Valerie Pratt, welcome Valerie. And then Julia Reisinger, sidekick, and Mark Takazawa. So those are the current board members as of our most recent election that we had in December. So returning and new. And we have some visitors. Very much want to welcome Carissa is a regular, Carissa Yang, and also Elizabeth. Elizabeth, what's your last name?
My last name is Klobuchar.
Klobuchar. Okay. You want to spell that for me?
Yeah, it's K-L-O-B as in boy, U-C-H-E-R.
E-R. Okay, cool. Thank you. Just for the minutes, we have that for ongoing. And then Eric Holstrom, I see you're here. Welcome. Let's see, and those are our visitors. Okay, so that's everybody on the board. Welcome again to the board meeting. This isn't the January annual membership meeting is a little bit different in that we do some things on the agenda that we don't do every month. And we have Q&A, and then we go into other regular business that we need to conduct. So if you are a guest, I welcome you to stay for the whole meeting. But if after the treasurer's report and the discussion topics and the Q&A, you don't feel like sticking around for some of the other updates, we're not going to be offended if you hang up. That's not a problem. But I just wanted to make sure that you were welcome for the whole thing if you wanted to stay. The first thing we need to do as a board is approve the minutes from the November 2025 meeting. And Deb sent those out. Did everybody get a chance to read those? Okay, I see some nodding of heads. All right. Anybody have any updates or corrections to the minutes? Seeing some shaking of heads. Okay, so I would welcome a motion to accept the minutes, the November 2025 minutes as submitted.
I can motion.
I'll second.
Okay, so Mark Takazawa made the motion to approve the minutes and Carrie Fleischer seconded. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Great, the minutes are approved. All right. So before we can do any further business, the first thing we have to do is all of the officer positions were technically expired in December. And so at this meeting Cat, get out of the way. At this meeting, we have to elect new officers, and the terms would be for 2 years unless somebody steps down early, which may be the plan for the VP of Race Operations. What we had talked about before, talking with the different volunteers, is the candidates who volunteered for roles. I volunteered to be president, and then Debbie Hall volunteered to stay on as treasurer. Mark Barrett volunteered to stay on as Vice President of Race Operations. And Deb Brown is stepping down, and Valerie Pratt volunteered to step in to serve as Secretary. So those are the current people. So what we need to do is have a motion to approve those board members to serve in those officer positions for the next 2 years.
I move we accept the slate of officers as proposed.
Okay.
I'll second. Julia seconds.
All right. So Susan Cooper moved to approve the officers as presented, and Julia seconded. Any discussion? Nobody wants to volunteer for any positions? All right. All in favor of approving the officers as presented, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. The motion carries. Thank you, everybody, for volunteering for the positions. I know some of you, I had to twist your arms. Moving forward in 2026, President will be Tracy Reisinger, Secretary will be Valerie Pratt, Treasurer will be Debbie Hall, and VP of Race Operations will be Mark Barrett. And we just need to get that in the minutes so that we can update. We use the minutes to update banks and IRS records and stuff. So thank you, everybody. Next up, Debbie, financials.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. I know the agenda says final report for 2025. However, what it is there's just a few more outstanding things. Let's see, that we are looking at for 2025, including Deb. Thank you so much for providing that very detailed race report from Autumn Leaves. I'm seeing a few things in there that we should talk about. So offline, let's talk more about that. I do plan for next meeting to have the final numbers. And I'm trying to file the 2025 taxes in May and not wait till November, not have the extension on there. So hopefully we'll have everything ready for final. But the final numbers, let's see if we can find those yet. The 2025, if we look over here on the far left, I'm sorry, right and left don't go for me, east and west are better. The numbers for our budget, oh, that's not the one, 25, oh, 25 right here. This one. Anyway, we've got the 2025 numbers in. I think you all looked at the P&Ls that we sent out, and that's really the numbers that are there for our 2025. We came in really well. We had the extra money right from the turkey trot. That was great. We tried to get everything in there, and I think we'll go into more of that in just a bit, right?
Yep.
Okay. Let's see, for the 2026. Oh, okay. First of all, sorry, I want to go back to 2025. Boy, my brain is not working. I don't think I have enough dinner. Susan sent me a message, and thank you so much, Susan, for asking about this the very topic here. I'm going to switch over here. These race numbers here, in the gray, what they mean, and they don't match the financial numbers because, and I forgot that I haven't said this for a while, because we have races that spread income and expense over 2 fiscal years or 2 different fiscal years, the actual race numbers and the race numbers for the fiscal year do not match. What really counts for the IRS is reporting on the actual fiscal year, but for our race director purposes and for budgeting purposes for actual races, we use what exactly the race spent. And sometimes you spend in December and it goes into January, etc. And a tribute to what we've been doing lately is that we do have cash balances on hand, and that's these here. So our cash balances are as shown here. We, as a sort of the finance committee or the executive committee, met to move some of the funds as was mandated in the previous meeting to the money market account. And so that has happened. So you can yeah, so you can see there that the cash balances are about the same. We've just moved it to a money market where we will make better interest than just plain on-point savings. We had to keep a little bit in savings, I think, to keep it open, but maybe we don't need to keep it open at all, but that's what they left there.
Yep.
So, and our move earlier in 2025 to take money from checking into savings has been just fine as well. We haven't not had any need for cash shortages, even with our biggest cash expense which was paying for the zoo facility for the turkey trot. We didn't even need any cash flow to flow into the checking up for that amount. So we're very much in the black, very flush with that. I think 2026 approved budget, we had that last time. And so you can see it here. These are donations, income. This is our budget here for those. Your races, all the race directors, each race director sort of puts together their own budgets and turns them in and works with the president and the race director, the head race director, Mark, to make sure everything is sort of going the right way on that. You can see at the bottom here, I can't remember if you can see my pointer. My pointer says race subsidy there. What, maybe, Tracy, do you want to talk about that just a bit?
Yeah, and I'll talk about that again in the state of the club update. But because we changed our pricing structure for Turkey Trot and the registration process, we had a lot more money from Turkey Trot than we originally budgeted. We only budgeted 95,000 in income, and we had over 135. I think it was an insane amount over. And so in December, we had a virtual vote. We didn't meet in December as a board, but we had an email discussion and vote. And we decided to use those excess funds to subsidize our events, which allows us to, we cut, except for Turkey Trot, we cut all of the race entry fees by $10. So that will help both ORRC members and non-ORRC members and hopefully increase participation. So the races may end up getting more revenue than we've budgeted because they may have higher participation. But the main thing is if they think there's going to be, if there's a loss, we're subsidizing them so they can keep their prices low. So that was one of the things we approved.
Great. Okay. Thank you. And hear more about the others in a little while. You can go through that. You can go through this on your own if you'd like, but we do have the budgeted amounts here for the 2026 member community events outreach. That's in these columns here. And then down below is our general club operating expenses, what we use for that. You can see those here. And then at the bottom, you see we've got the balance. We've balanced the budget. And while it may or may not end up being over or under or exactly right on, again, we've got the reserves, and hopefully that subsidy will help in both ways, like you were saying, Tracy. Let's see. Anything, anyone have any questions about any of this?
Hey, Debbie, this is Mark T. So question for you or Mark B. On the turkey trot, out of curiosity, did we have to subsidize a coffee place or did they have enough?
In the end, they gave us a minimum for people to spend there, and we did not meet the minimum, so we had to pay that.
Okay.
We had to pay the difference, and we had the post turkey trot discussion was decided we probably won't do it again in 2026. You know, this is a new thing. We tried it, it didn't work, so you know we won't be doing it in the future probably.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
One last thing is next month at the meeting, I will try and get even a better, get everything from 2025 really tight down so we can see exactly what happened. And I don't foresee us having to adjust any of our budget, but we'll know for sure at that point.
Cool.
Any other questions?
Cool.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Okay, so that's treasurer's report. Now we're going to go into the state of the club. That's me. And I sent an attachment so Deb doesn't have to write all this down verbatim or anything like that. I'm just going to read this because I want this all to be on the record and to be very clear for everybody. So I want to say once again, it's been my privilege and honor to lead this club over the past of the last year, and I'm pleased to report the club is really as strong as ever. As you can tell by our financials, we're doing really, really well. It's in great shape. And I want to start by acknowledging our fantastic volunteers. And I know I've introduced everybody, but I want to thank all of the returning board members for agreeing to serve again. We didn't lose anybody this year to retirement. And we welcomed a new member, Joe. This is his first official board meeting. So welcome, Joe, to your first one. So thank you so much for agreeing to serve and continuing to volunteer for the club. I want to thank our race directors. We had 16 race directors for our 12 events that we held in 2025. I want to thank the new race directors who've kind of come on and taken over for some of those who have stepped back. And thanks to all of you, we can keep having the same events in 2026. We're not going to have to cut anything. There are too many race directors to mention, but I definitely want you to know that I appreciate all of you and all you do, and every one of you, and thank you for what you've done and will continue to do in 2026. I also want to acknowledge our different activity coordinators. The club had 14 different coordinators for different activities that aren't elected positions or race directors, but they still help us run the club, like the volunteer coordinator, membership, the training workouts, the communications, the web person. You're all just fantastic. So I really want to thank you. But I especially want to thank Carissa. She is going to be taking a step back after this year. She's been our communications coordinator, and she's just done an incredible job over the last 2.5 years. And she's she promised she'll still help with some special projects that we're working on, but she's just done a fantastic job. And as she's stepping back, I want to acknowledge that she's been fantastic these last 2.5 years. So thank you, Carissa. In 2025, we had 246 volunteers at non-duplicative at all of our events. And that's not including all the high school groups that helped out. So we've had a ton of volunteers. That's more than we had the last year, which is more than the year before. We only had 230 in 2024. It takes so many of us to put on these events that we do. And I said it before, I'll say it again, we couldn't do it without everybody. So the race directors, board of directors, and the coordinators, we're kind of the face of the club, but we can't do it without all of the other people who show up and volunteer and help us do what we do. So it's a collective effort. You're all doing a fantastic job, and I really, really appreciate all of you. In January 2025, so this time last year, we had 758 members. That was up slightly from the same time the year before. We were heading in the right direction. As of January 26, because of the way we changed registration for the Turkey Trot, we have 1,218 members. So it's totally due to that. But I'm hoping that people who like to keep doing the Turkey Trot will be able to hang on to some of those numbers for next year. So, and that helped us also with increased membership dues and stuff as added income as well. So we're just doing great. We have more volunteers, we have more members, we have more income. It's just, things are looking very well. So one of the things we did last year, we made a significant change to our budget. There was a shift to where the funds were focused to be more on members and community outreach and less on like storage and professional services. And it also allowed for individual events not to generate as much revenue due to cutting costs in those other areas. The 2026 budget that Debbie went over was approved during the October 25 board meeting. And since then, due to the pricing and registration changes of Turkey Trot, we had a whole lot of extra income due to Turkey Trot registration fees and increased membership dues. And also with the changes in the investments moving to the money market, instead of getting 0.3% or something, we're going to be getting closer to 4.5%. So we're going to be getting a lot more investment income on that $130,000. So we have this influx of income, and the board had the online discussion, and we decided to do two things. One of them kind of already discussed. We reduced the entry fees for all of our events except Turkey Trot by $10 to help it kind of goes back to our roots of we want to put on inexpensive quality events. And that helps both members and non-members and hopefully increases participation. So that was one of the big things that we did. And that was going to cost us about $25,000 to implement that cost reduction. The other thing that we have approved is the purchase of a new member giveaway. Do you want to quick grab the hat? So it's in the process. We've ordered it. They're on the way. We expect them to be delivered in February. So all ORRC members will be eligible to collect a new ORRC brim hat in 2026. And ta-da! Here it is. So it has the patch on the front, and there's white there. There's reflective gear stuff here and reflective stuff on the back. So that is the new ORRC hat that everybody can get. And we're partnering with Foot Traffic, so saving money. We're not going to be mailing these except for people who are out more than 50 miles from the Portland metro area. What we're doing is we're going to have them available at 2 of the Foot Traffic stores, and members will be able to pick them up at the Foot Traffic stores. And Foot Traffic will have a list of memberships. We're going to be sending out a coupon for the members to bring with them to show that they are a member, and then their name will be crossed off and they can pick up their hat. So, so that's going to be really cool. So those are the 2 big things that we approved with this excess money for 2026. So all those are changes reflected in the budget, and our hope is we'll be able to continue to offer these lower prices and stuff for members, and hopefully just increase participation in our events because of it. So in closing, I want to thank each and every one of you for supporting ORRC. I welcome your feedback, questions, comments, how we're doing, good, bad, ugly, whatever. I love to hear it. We all need your input to help us run the club and the way you want us to do it. So thank you again, and look forward to seeing you on the roads. And that's the state of the club address. Any questions? Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So there I have, and I don't know how to do this. Can everybody who's on the meeting, can you make sure your camera's on? And Carissa, can you do a screenshot of everybody?
Or a picture so we
can get a picture of everybody? Is that possible? Okay. And so what I'd like to do, Carissa, when you're ready, is everybody just smile. Wait, are we getting Mark? Are we getting Mark? Mark's there.
Nope, not quite.
Nope.
Nope, no camera.
Camera's not working.
All right,
Sorry.
that's okay, Mark.
So Carissa, you just tell us when we're ready, when we're good, or if you've already got it.
You're muted.
You're muted. We're probably good.
1, 2, 3.
Oh,
Sorry.
What? Where did that come from? Oh my God.
I won't do my thumbs.
I took some grabs.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And if you're going to be at the membership banquet at the end of the month, I also would love to get a group shot of everybody actually in person together. That would be awesome. So next up is just for those of you who are visiting, this is a time for anybody to ask any questions of us. Provide us any feedback if you would like, Elizabeth or Eric, Marissa. If anybody has any comments, we'd love to hear.
Well, hi, I'm Elizabeth. As you can tell, I'm new here. Also, my cat decided that she would like to join as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So I moved to Portland the end of August. So new to Portland in general and kind of new to the running space here. Avid runner, not really a racer. I just like to run for the sake of running, I guess. So I'm kind of really wondering, now that I'm new to Portland, just wondering like best ways to get involved in the running community, volunteer opportunities, and different things I can do to support local organizations like this in the community is really my big thing.
Yeah. Well, okay. First off, just in terms of getting involved and breaking it down to volunteering and also just participating in things, there are we partner with Foot Traffic for training groups on Mondays on the west side and Thursdays at the Sellwood store. So if you wanted to work out with a group of people, they meet at 6 o'clock. And then on the first workout of the month, ORRC provides pizza or food or whatever they want to do. So that's a way to meet people. I'm not sure which side of town you're on, so that one of them might be better than the other.
Northwest. I'm like, I don't even know what side of town I'm on.
Yeah, might be the
Probably
west
west
side.
side.
I'd say west side probably. But also volunteering, there's so many different ways to volunteer, either with ORRC or with other organizations. We also work with Tualatin Hills Parks and Rec with their middle school cross country and track and field program. So if you wanted to volunteer, you could be a coach, you could just be a volunteer at the meets, do that. You can volunteer at Liberty Fit. It's a high school where they train, they have kids who are not on the cross country or track team, generally like lower income. They train to do the Helvetia Half Marathon in June, and they always need people to help them with their training programs.
Okay.
There's also, we have our 12 events. You can volunteer for any of our events. There's also lots of different events around town. There's Park Run, which is both on our side of town and also over in West Lynn. It's West Lynn, where they do a free 5K every Saturday.
I did one up in Victoria, Canada over Thanksgiving when I was visiting my friends. My first park run.
Yep, and they have them all over the country, and they're two in Oregon. So that's a great way to meet people on a regular basis. A lot of the running stores have programs for runners to do for training programs like couch to 5K, things like that. So there's lots of different ways that you could get involved. If you are interested in volunteering for one of our events, I would work with Carrie. She's our volunteer coordinator, and she can give you a heads up on what, let you know what you're interested in and what might be good for you. We're always looking for volunteers. So
yeah,
awesome.
I'll just, Elizabeth, if you are interested in ORRC opportunities, just email volunteer@OregonRoadrunnersClub.org, and then we'll get you dialed in. There's many opportunities. So.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
it's nice to meet you.
Thank you so much. This sounds amazing. Yeah, like this is I'm just like a big avid runner and whatnot, and looking now that I'm new here, just looking for ways to meet people, but then also just like support my local community in a way that I can give back in a good fashion.
For
Great.
sure.
Awesome.
Joe.
And Elizabeth, if you're interested in your trail running, the meetup group, there's a Northwest Trail Runners. So if you meet them up, that we normally run in Forest Park.
Oh, it's so beautiful in there.
So that's just another avenue for you to pursue as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure. Great. Any other questions, comments, feedback?
I just really want to thank the board for the years and dedication that you've been putting in. I've been a long time member, and now I'm retired from teaching. I've got a little bit more time, and I was a little curious and wondering about. I saw the email today about setting up courses and what that involved. If that's something different than being volunteering on the regular volunteer spots.
So, Eric, this is Carrie. I was the one that sent out that email, and Mark Barrett, who's currently muted, maybe he can unmute. One of the initiatives that we talked about this past weekend is recruiting people and really training them into really understanding how to work with the course setup and in some cases tear down on any number of our races. And so, Mark, do you want to touch on that a little bit in the conversations that we were having in our needs in the organization?
Sure. The short version is we need more Hals. For those of you, Hal has been our guy, and I mean, we had 12 events last year, and he was the guy for all 12 of our ORRC events last year, which meant that he was in charge of loading the truck before the event, during the event, dropped the signs and cones along the course, picked them all up, and brought everything back and unloaded the truck. And he didn't do it all by himself. He had help with each of those different stages of it. But that is a great burden to put on anyone. And so our goal for this year is to get more people to do that, to be the Hal, to be the guy for events. If we could get, a handful of people each taking a few events, it would lessen the burden on any one person. And it's good because, life happens. Somebody gets hurt, somebody gets sick, and we need someone to fill in. So, like I said, the job, how can I say, we would train you, mentor you, I mean, you or whoever to do, but it's, like I said, it's about learning how to load a truck efficiently. HAL is a great system. We've written it down. And then good race directors, they should have like a point by point, like, okay, drive this point, drop so many cones and whatever. And then when you're done, you pick everything up and then, try to load and put things back in the storage unit. And again, nobody does all four of those tasks alone, but it really helps to have one person take the lead on it. And we just want to take that burden off Hal and share it with other people. And if you are willing to, you and anyone else, to commit to just doing, one race and do it with Hal, learn how it works, and then maybe take another one later in the year once you've learned how it all goes. But that's the idea. It's a behind the scenes getting the work done kind of a job. There's not a whole lot of glory in it. I mean, as a runner, you're just kind of doing your thing and, stop at the aid station and there's water and you get to the finish line and all that kind of stuff. You really don't notice all the work that's involved. And this is just people who are willing to do the important behind the scenes kind of work. And like I said, the idea is to get many people involved. The idea is to train you, mentor you, so that it's a great job for someone who's retired.
And isn't afraid to drive a truck. And isn't afraid to drive a truck.
I guess that's the other big thing. Thank you for mentioning. That's kind of the big thing because typically we're renting a U-Haul truck, and depending upon the size of the event, the bigger the event, the bigger the truck, kind of a thing. And there are some people who are comfortable driving, like a 10-foot U-Haul van, and that's kind of what most people who have you've moved an apartment kind of thing. It's about that size. But some of the bigger events, it'll be a 20-foot truck, which is pretty big, and that's intimidating to some people. So part of it is a comfort level with driving a truck, like that kind of a thing. But part of it too is we've had discussions about divide and conquer. Like maybe instead of one big 20-foot truck, maybe let's get 2 10-footers instead, that kind of a thing. So if driving a big truck is an issue, there's ways around it. So.
Yes.
Thanks. So I'd be interested, so if I want to help out Hal on that, should I just volunteer for the loading of the truck and kind of hang with them, or what would be the best to do about it?
That's usually the day before. We're talking the day of an event. I guess I would say if you want to talk to Deb Brown, she's the RD for the Hag Mud, because that's the next thing coming up. And maybe talk to Deb, talk to Hal, and you be Hal's partner for the whole process is a great way to learn how it all works.
Good.
So I guess that's a conversation for you to, give Deb a call and partner with Hal and, learn the ropes.
So
Deb, will you be at the awards banquet? Touch bases with you?
Yes, I will be at the awards banquet. Yeah.
I think he
We
was
can talk
asking
more.
me if I was going to be. I will try to be. And Eric, we've worked together at Autumn Leaves.
Yeah.
You came both days, so you can send me an email to the Autumn Leaves or to the Hagmud
Okay.
email address, and I'll get that.
Okay.
Thank you for you're a stalwart volunteer. Thank you so much.
yeah, so if you decide to go to it's Hagmud, HAGGMUD at Oregon Road Runners Club. If you want to reach out to Deb that way, that would be the email address that she'll get.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. The next thing is the ORRC logos. Carissa has been working on this project for us, and she was going to give us some information and update on how's that going.
Okay. Let me see if I can still share my computer's. I don't know what it's doing. If I can't, we don't have to do this, but let me try this. Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
You do? Okay. So, yeah, thanks for giving me a little bit of time. I don't know how prepared I am, I'm sorry. But, um, let's see. So back in June, I had a number of proposals with four main concerns I brought up. I'm not going to go into them in detail, but that's just to refresh your memories for those who were there. And Tracy talked me into actually working on the redesigns, which I hadn't actually wanted to do at the time. I just wanted to suggest ways in which we should do it and things we should consider. But this is what we had prior to doing the redesigns, and some of the issues I wanted to address were, well, first of all, these are fun logos, but they don't necessarily look like they all come from Oregon Roadrunners Club because there's nothing that ties them together. Some of them are clearly identified as Oregon Roadrunners Club. Some of them are weakly identified, and some of them don't really say Oregon Roadrunners Club in them. Some of them are hard to read if they're reduced to a small size. And some of them no longer represent our values too well. Like has a runner in it, but it just looks like your typical like athletic young male, and we want to represent more than that. So here we are now. So we have Oregon Roadrunners Club attached to each logo in a uniform manner that hopefully ties these together and identifies them as our events. There's not just a man in the Autumn Leaves logo anymore, but there's another figure that doesn't just look like a young man. And taking kind of a conservative approach, we didn't necessarily revise everything. We weren't crazy. We still like the Vernonia logo. That's fine. I wasn't looking to do a full rebrand because that's very expensive and disruptive. The other problem we had was when we reduce logos, which we often have to do, and on a lot of websites, for example, and other areas, you couldn't see it. So I made a mini version for each logo for when we have a need to have a reduced size. Hag Mud is missing for now because they produced a lot of swag with the previous logo. So again, we don't want to cause a lot of waste. It made sense to use what we have, and also that's coming up soon. So it gave us more time to consider what we want the future logo to be. I kind of wanted to show this just so everybody knows where it is, and then I think I'll probably communicate more with Tracy. I want, for me, before I produce like final versions, I think these are final versions, but I just want to be sure, like maybe we'll send them just like the names, like Hag Leg Run. Yesterday I was like, is it Hag Leg Road Run or Hag Leg Run? I just don't want to produce them and find out it was a little different than what I thought. So, yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Just wanted to give that update. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer anything too.
Those look amazing. That is awesome.
Well, thanks.
I have one question.
Sure.
I mean, I see it's just got like the autumn leaves or whatever, but almost every medal I have says the distance on it.
Yes, that's a great question. So I have a file in which the text is there as text. So if for any given year somebody wants to produce a medal with the distance or the year, that can be added. But I might have wanted to just make generic, everlasting, as much as possible versions that we could put on the website or, just as a baseline.
It's great. I thought maybe it was because we run out of room.
Oh, nope, there's room. This is flexible and everything is vector and text is as text,
perfect.
so it can be edited. Yep.
Yeah, and so once these are finalized, what Carissa will let us know is we're going to have all of these available in the different in the Google Drive and in a shared file folder, and then there'll be different formats. So there's large, small, black, white, whatever, all the different things. I know, like when we were originally doing Pumpkin Ridge, like 2 years ago or something, we had like 5 different versions of the logo for different sizes and pixel sizes and stuff like that, which I don't understand. Carissa knows all that stuff. So once they're all available, that's when we'll get the race directors out there to let you know, so that you can start planning for your events for this year.
Carissa, this is Deb. I have a question.
Yeah.
I remember when you were doing one of the presentations, there was a version that had just the picture and then it had the words next to the picture. Is that still an option that you were thinking of including? Because I was wondering if it would be somehow more legible depending on, if you were doing small, medium, large. Obviously, the main ones that you first showed, that's the large logo because you can read everything. But yeah, I remembered you had something like that. Is that still one of the options that we're thinking of doing?
These were the
Yeah, my thought is that what's inside the circle is your visual logo, and as long as you have the words somewhere, they don't have to be in a circular format. That's
Oh,
my thought. I mean, I don't think we hashed this out in detail, but yeah, this is a suggestion for if you need it all together. But I think if you just want to use what's inside the circle and you want to use the words outside in a different manner, I think that's fine, as long as it's easy to read, doesn't use like some wild font. But we're just looking,
yeah.
I think
It
so.
should, like if it had the standardized font, like if you want us to use the same font for everything because it's legible and consistent. Yeah, would we know how to do that as race directors, or should we circle back with you?
I think that's open for discussion. I think I'm planning to provide some graphic support this year.
Yeah, I think basically what we wanted to do was get, and I know Autumn Leaves is special because we're using the old logo until Hagmug is special because we're doing that. But what we really wanted was to make it kind of standardized. So if at all possible, to use this so it's instantly recognizable as this. Once we start getting into different shapes or different, different wording types and stuff like that, then it becomes, we'd have to have not consistent, and we'd have to have a graphics designer work on it. So that's why we wanted to kind of include everybody's in here and kind of get it finalized. And I think, except for Heg Mud, all the race directors have approved what you're seeing here. So this is pretty final. It's just now getting them into the proper formats.
Okay.
Sizes, because Carissa wanted to fix.
The question that I was asking was an alternative that I think could be a little easier to read if you needed it to be smaller in the circle. I just have a hard time seeing the logo at all in the tiny ones. And if there was a version that just had the circle, and then we could put the words next to it. And I may be remembering something from a different presentation. So I apologize if this is confusing. I can
I think I know what you're talking about, and I
Yeah.
think we can circle back to that, but
Yeah.
maybe it's a little outside of the scope of what we're talking now, or
Yeah. These look amazing though, Carissa. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. And I think you're referring to the logo guidelines sheet that I made earlier, which I think can be kind of integrated into this picture. But it's not part of what I'm talking about today.
All right. Awesome job, Carissa.
Tracy?
Yeah.
My phone is dying and work is crazy. I apologize. I have to leave early, and I have two things on the agenda real quick. One is a report on Ralph's run. It was awesome. It really great. The numbers are up and weather was perfect and it's just a good thing. And the other thing is the issue of the date for the Hague Road. And I'll send an email out, maybe do an email vote on that. Because I apologize. I thought I had charged my phone. I did not, and it's dying. And besides, work is just crazy. I can't. I apologize.
Oh, all right. No worries,
So
Mark.
I will send out an email about the date for Hague Road. We got a little bit of time to figure that out. So
Okay.
okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next big topic, which I know everybody's so excited about, but it's super important. I really want to emphasize that. Who was it? Mark, Barrett, Carrie, and Deb and Julie and I met on Saturday and went page by page through the race director manual and the policies and procedures manual for the board. And I want to kind of just briefly give an overview. We have our bylaws, which is what we have to run the club by, and that any changes to bylaws have to be approved by the membership. Policies and procedures is just kind of instructions for board members and race directors and coordinators to help them with doing their jobs. And any changes to policies and procedures doesn't have to be approved by the membership. It just has to be approved by the board. So that's what we're discussing now. And I sent out a couple of times because I forgot something, information on what we were changing, proposing to change in there. Anything that the board had already approved, like the changes to how much we pay our group volunteers, that was already approved by the board. So that's not included in here. We just went ahead and updated the manual for that. So anything the board's already approved in previous meetings, that's already been updated. So these are just things where we thought we needed to bring it to the board to discuss and have a vote on before we actually made those changes. So did everybody get them and have a chance to take a look at them? Okay, so I'm going to kind of go over this pretty quickly. But first of all, any place where there's a link to the race director manual, the race director manual is a generic manual for how to put on an event, not specifically an ORRC event, but any type of running event. And we put this on our website as a resource for anybody who wants to put on an event. We use it at our race director workshop where we train people how to be race directors. Any place in the policies and procedures where it talks about how to do something in a race that refers to the race director handbook, we're going to automatically update the link. So we don't have to worry about that. And the race director manual, we've already updated. There were very, very few changes to that. So the next one, first page is the page 7, the branding and logos. We wanted to insert the final logo guidelines when they were finalized, and Carissa's going to be working on that, so we can add that to that. And we also wanted on page 9 to approve the communications, marketing, and social media. We had links to older social media recommended calendar timelines, and Carissa inserted new links that had kind of sample timelines, and also some new guidelines for everybody. So we wanted to remove the old links and put the new ones in. So hopefully you had a chance to look at what she included. I did also think that you have the social media guideline. You actually were going to put it as a link, but I thought it might be better to put it as an appendix. So that way it's just all in one place instead of updating over here and then updating, like just put it in the appendix and put it there. So
That makes
that's my
sense.
recommendation. Coordinators, we just added the training group coordinator wording because that wasn't in there before, and we do have coordinators that work on that. The legal, I've kind of explained it in this paragraph. I'm going to follow up with Jean at RRCA just to get documentation that we are covered under them. So for those of you who haven't seen this, this has been an ongoing for now 2-3 years of what our status is. We are a nonprofit organization. We know that, but it's not an issue. What we're trying to do is get official documentation where we can show this shows we are a nonprofit. And we have different people saying, you know, RRCA said one thing, then they said another, and then the IRS didn't get back to us, and then they said, no, you're covered under RRCA. So the bottom line is we think at this point we are covered under RRCA's policy of nonprofit. I just need to get RRCA to provide us with documentation of that so we can then have that in our legal documentation. So doesn't change anything. It's just we're trying to get the paperwork to match everything. So and then we will update that in the policies and procedures once we get the documentation. Also on page 21, this is really important because this was something Mark Barrett was recommending it. He is race director for Vernonia. The previous board that resigned was trying to get rid of him as a race director, but they didn't have any process for getting rid of him, and they didn't really have any cause for getting rid of him. And so Mark wrote up a policy for removing a race director with cause, and also how to reinstate a race director if he had been removed. And very rarely would we have to use this, but we really wanted a policy so that if we did have somebody who we needed to get rid of, we needed to have a process for them to be able to present their case. We can present our case, and a committee can bring it to the board what they find. So it's really, I don't anticipate we'll need it, but we wanted to have a process in place if we wanted to get rid of somebody for cause. And usually it would be something like misusing funds from races or something like that, or something like that. So we wanted to add that policy in there. One of the things, Debbie, that we need to there's a term in the race director financial management section that says commingling, and there was some confusion, so they just wanted to have a definition and an example of it just for clarity. So if you could write that up and we can get that entered, that would be great. And then page 26 under volunteers, there is, we wrote up a policy for managing groups of volunteers. The past couple of events, we've had some issues with some of our group volunteers, and we want to make sure it's clearly spelled out for race directors, and that we can also communicate with those groups so we know they know what's expected of them. And so that group policy would be an appendix there. So I included that. That included the reinstatement and then the volunteer one. So that was included in there. I think that was everything I had there. Did anybody have any questions on what we were suggesting for additions or updates? It was a lot of information, I know. Valerie?
This is with the race director removal. And I'm gonna not name names, but like when I was treasurer, I had a race director that demanded to use my club visa, and that person ended up not being a person of integrity, let's say. So my only concern, and mostly I think we get reimbursed, but I just want to make sure they don't have access to club funds if they're under investigation.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Debbie?
So I want me to speak a little bit to that.
Sure.
Club funds now are only spent through the 2 debit cards that are held by Tracy and by me, and by checks that are held at my personal residence. So that race directors or anyone else shouldn't have any access to taking any funds out of any bank accounts, which is all we have. The club does not hold a credit card, and so they shouldn't. And most race expenses are, well, I guess most non huge race expenses are through the race directors and they ask for reimbursement. Larger ones, I require an invoice to be invoiced to me. I don't just write
Perfect.
someone a check,
Yeah.
say, here's a check to you, Michael, for the porta potties. You know, I pay directly to
Right.
the porta potty people and require an invoice and reimbursement forms, everything.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, at the time we had Visa cards, a couple board members did, and so it was a little dicey, and it sounds like you've got good practices in place.
Hopefully.
Any other questions on these proposed updates, additions, changes? Okay, hearing none, I would welcome a motion to approve the policies and procedures updates as presented. I'll move.
Julia
Second.
moves.
Okay,
Valerie
so
seconds.
Julia moved to accept them and Valerie seconded. All in favor of the motion, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, any opposed? Cool, the motion passes. All right, so we'll go ahead and get those updates entered in there and let you know how the IRS thing with the RRCA works out. Okay. All right, that is our discussions. What I have next are event recaps. We didn't have a December meeting, so we never really had a recap of Turkey Trot, but a bunch of us met and had a kind of a hash out or whatever you call it, a debrief on the event and came up with ideas for it for next year. We are definitely going to do a couple of changes in terms of parking, and that was the biggest issue was parking, I think. And we still have an issue with crowds coming and going near the start finish area. It's very narrow. There's just a narrow path there. We're going to go back to the zoo. They haven't approved it in the past. What we want is for runners and walkers to be coming in on the trail and then exiting via the bear enclosure. One of the
Well,
it's a different pathway
have
out.
two gates open.
Two gate, and that's no within
Yeah,
the zoo.
yeah,
You
yeah.
have two directions, and then also have a second gate open, so it's not as hard there. But we're not changing the pricing structure. We're going to change a little bit what the caps are, so that and change and have a deadline. So that basically we're going to cut off registration. I forget the week before, so that if you want to be in, you have to be in by November 21st, I think is the date we decided on, just because it's hard to communicate with people when they're registering the night before and getting instructions out. So, but it went really, really well for overall. And then Ralph's run, Carrie, you're the co-RD. Anything you want to, I know it went really
Yeah, I mean, I think Mark did most of the planning, which he normally does. And I think overall, I think he was pleased with the race. People seemed to be in a good spot. There was at one point there was a question as to whether or not the course was marked correctly. It appeared that a couple of runners may have turned around too soon, but the course was marked correctly. It was more of a runner issue than anything else. So we addressed that. But it did highlight some things and Tracy mentioned this with group volunteers and just how we need to logistically kind of prep our groups when they arrive, especially when we're dealing with students, making sure that we're communicating that they have a chaperone and that they have transportation to get to their designated spot especially if they're course marshals. But overall, I mean, it was well attended. People, I was really surprised. This was a pancake feed. So people hung around, had a great conversation with Joe. It was nice to spend some time getting to know Joe a little bit better as he's joining the board. But it was a very friendly event and people hung around for a while. And I think that the pancake feed lended to that, which was really nice. You don't always see that at all of our races. So it was good. Yeah.
cool. Valerie.
I was out on the longest course, and the three of us that were out there, we were right before a turn, and so we had to keep telling people to turn right. So one of our suggestions is to just maybe where the aid stations are, include some chalk, so you can just mark that if it's close to you.
I'll put that down and let Mark know.
Yeah, because people, when you're out there running and you're not sure, it's not really, really clear because I think your mind's somewhere else, that anything like that I think really helps people.
Yeah, no, that's good. I just made a note of that.
Okay. And it's cheap. Huh?
Yeah, they ended up having great weather. I mean, it just the race ended up being right in the best part of the
It
day,
was
and
gorgeous.
So yeah, the window was perfect.
yeah, it was great. So, no, overall, I think Mark seemed very pleased. But I think that we ended up having some good conversation that's touched on in this meeting in terms of figuring out how to get more people involved in learning how to set up the course. Mark was having me learn a little bit of that this year. I found that very interesting. It's not hard. You just need to have a little bit of direction and be out there and see what's going on, and then it all kind of clicks and makes sense. So this idea of getting more people engaged with the course setup makes perfect sense. And there were some other takeaways with Turkey Trot that I think, because I'm dealing with the volunteers, we're trying to engage, and this goes to really all the board members. If you know groups that are trying to fundraise, we are trying to reach out to more people to get them to sign up, and we want to be able to specifically assign them to places. And we are increasing our fees. We are now paying $50 versus $25. So depending on how many volunteers, it's really great opportunity for fundraising groups. So if you're hearing this and of organizations that we haven't tapped into, let us know. We would love to reach out to them. And I will also just put in the plug for Turkey Trot, that if you're not going to be available on the Turkey Day itself, on the race day, because we know it's a major holiday and it's hard, please find a way to plug in. There's a lot of stuff that's going on those few days. It gets really, really busy, and we need some help in that. I will just tell you from my perspective. We're going to start recruiting early for that. It's only a year away, but it's going to be here before you know it. So, okay, so I'll put a plug in for that.
Yeah, I also want to emphasize that I think I sent an email to everybody that we're not going to require people to volunteer for Turkey Trot. Mark wants us to do that, but I said, no, we're not going to do that. But this really is an all hands on deck type thing. Turkey Trot is our main fundraiser for the club. It helps us run our organization and helps us subsidize our other events. And we need experienced people who have done races. We can't be relying on a team of high school students to be directing certain things, especially with parking. We just need the help of everybody that we can. And even if it's not the day of, if it's helping pick up the pies on Tuesday before, or something like that, we could definitely use that help. We're loading the truck the day before or something. It's definitely need you guys' help to do that. So cool. All right. So, yeah, the next upcoming events, we have the membership banquet coming up. Valerie.
We've got 107 people signed up, and it's capped at 150, so that's pretty exciting. And I just went to the poll center today to check in with them and about everything. And so I could use because what kind of beverages? Like, I was just going to get sodas and iced teas and maybe coffee, but is there anything else that you think people would want?
Just water.
Water, of course, yeah.
Yeah, but that's good. I think it's fine.
Okay. And so I think we're pretty set for that one. I grabbed some signs out of the storage so we can put something up front so people know it's the right place.
Yeah.
So
are you going to put up the big ORRC huge thing that people can take pictures in front of, or?
I was thinking about it. I didn't grab it, but I'm thinking that might be kind of fun. So I think I like that thing.
Especially the awards winners.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we're on board. And then I do need to check in with you, Julie and Tracy, to get some pictures of people so I can maybe try to put together a slideshow. So,
okay. We've got, yep.
But other than that, we're on track.
Cool. And then Hag Mud, Deb how's that going?
Here, can you hear me?
Yeah, I should specify before Deb gets talking, for those of you who aren't familiar, because of last year's Hag Mud, we had to delay a week, which means that some people transferred to this year. And so we're not going to be getting as much revenue from those people. So we are expecting a lower revenue for this event specifically because of last year's issue with the snow.
Yeah, and it's a really expensive race to put on because the porta potties are expensive. The park charges you 10% of your gross. We have to get flaggers, and it tends to be a smaller race. So, and with it being a 1 day race, we don't really we save on the flaggers, we save on the medics, we save on our photographer fee, but some of the other fees, like the toilets, same price. So, the U-Haul, maybe we save a little bit. So it's a pretty expensive race to put on. So we have permits. I need to get in touch with some of our vendors that I have emailed and not heard back from. I am the solo race director this year, and it's a pretty tough race to be the only race director. Joel has a commitment that weekend, so although he entertained the idea of becoming a race director, he was not able to. He's going to try to help as much as he can the week of the race with like shopping and things like that. And then Stacy Lee, who's a trail runner and who's friends with some of the former race directors, um, said that she'd be willing to help, and she's taken over doing some social media recruiting for me and doing some posts. It just with a new job I had, just my amount of time that I have to put in is a lot less. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. I mean, registration, I think we had, gosh, I keep getting new registrations in, probably thanks to Stacy posting stuff on Instagram and Facebook. So every day I get a few more registrations, and actually I can click over to see.
So Deb, is there anything that the board can help you with prior to race day, or even, I mean, I know we're going to be working on volunteers. I sent out the request for volunteers. I'm going to reach out and try to get some groups. But is there some legwork that you need help with prior to that we could maybe plug in and help?
That's a great question.
I guess think about it and reach out to us, because if there's
Yeah.
an errand that needs to be run, I would certainly try to do. I'm happy to help you if you need some
Okay,
help.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple of the main vendors that I have to get confirmed, including our medics and the flaggers are the two big holes that, specifically the flaggers, I have not heard back from them. And the good thing is we have the walkie-talkies now, so we can have better communications. What I really need is like some captains of things. So like captain of the kitchen, captain of like the course. So like someone who would be like a new Hal. I do have sweepers, but I need course setup, which is someone running on the trail, setting up the course, and aid station captains. So, so it'd be great to just have captains so that I can not get stuck in the weeds and stressed out about things, and I can actually be more calm and capable of answering questions, since I'll be like the one person, the one resource. But if I
Yeah.
have captains, then I'll have other people to answer, to sort of just take those on so I don't have to stress about it. Like someone who's capable of doing the kitchen, I won't ever have to worry about that. They can just heat up the soup and make the grilled cheese and it'll all be good.
Well, so think about this, because I'm going to be up there all day, and I know that I'm going to be helping you with volunteer coordinating, but I can do that from the kitchen too. You can just come inside, check in the kitchen while we're heating up soup. So I mean, there's some double tasks. We can overlap. So be thinking about it in terms of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's a great idea, actually.
Yeah.
And what was the other part? So the big issue, which right now we need to hear back from the park, is that there is a bridge that got damaged. And so there's a big section of the trail that they've been working with Northwest Trail Alliance, which is a biking group that has really good trail maintenance, trail building skills. and they have done already 4 different work parties trying to, they've decided to relocate the trail around the area, but it's like a mile of new trail that has to be cut. So it's a huge endeavor. It will not be completely finished by the time the race starts, but it may be cleared, and like the brush it should be cleared, and it just won't have all the hardening done of like gravel and banking and stuff like that. So it's going to be up to the park directors whether we could use that not quite finished course. And then if they do say that we can, Mark Barrett and I will go and walk that section and see whether we think it's safe and passable enough. It will likely be more muddy. But the alternative would be that we would just bypass that section and go on the shoulder of the road like we do for other sections. So anyway, there's trail work opportunities to help with that as well through Northwest Trail Alliance. So that's the other big sticking point right now.
Okay.
Thank you,
All right.
guys.
The other event coming up is Shampooey in March. So Joe and Mark T and Valerie, how are things going with that?
Anything to add, Mark? Well, we're
I'll
just
try to
gonna
get off mute. I met Joe at Ralph's Run, so it's just a matter of hooking up. Hey, Joe, while I got you, can I write down your phone number again?
You want my what?
Your phone number?
My phone number.
Yeah.
I thought you took it all down then. Let me give it to you.
Hey, Joe, is it okay with you that that's going to be on the recording for all the public to see and hear?
Sorry about that.
Just FYI.
I wasn't even thinking about that. Sorry.
we can cut it out of the recording somehow, maybe.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea, because I mean, I did
beep.
feed all those details in by hand on that day.
Yeah.
And I never got the call. I was about to ask, what's going on with our race. We haven't had our sort of
We
a pre-race.
yeah.
We need to do that.
We need to coordinate. We tried to do it during the holidays, but that kind of
Yeah, it fell through.
yeah. So we need to do that. But the important thing is that we have porta potties and we can find water, so we can put on a race.
Yes.
And
I also wanted to let you guys know that I did request the certificates of insurance, and so
thank you.
I'll be getting those to you as soon as I get
And
them.
then right now we only have 41 people signed up, but that usually jumps up as
Hey, that's ahead of last year still, though. You're fine.
Yeah, we're good.
Well, I'm open to have that sort of pre-planning meeting as soon as possible, at least to start doing a framework for everything. So once we have a list of all the major scopes that need to be done, we can then work on the other details.
Yeah, that's what we need to meet. And I have a list from last year, so we can go through that.
Okay, great. No problem.
And Valerie, just let me know when and where, because
okay.
I only have 3 doctor's appointments this week, so it's
okay.
light.
Well, I have both your emails, so I'll get that coordinated.
Okay, thank you.
For you. And Joe, since you're giving out personal information, what part of town do you live in?
Well, I'm pretty close to you. How about that?
Okay, so we're all on the side of town, so we can figure something out. Okay.
Tomorrow, all day long, Joe's going to be getting what he thinks is spam calls.
Exactly.
Right.
No caller ID.
You're very optimistic about who watches these meetings.
That's why I don't answer my phone, because I'm getting like 50 spam calls a day, and it's like I'm not answering my phone. So
okay. Okay. We'll skip Vernonia since Mark isn't here, but I know it's going okay. The only thing I wanted to let you guys give you a heads up on that Mark kind of mentioned that is Hag Lake is usually right now it's scheduled for the second Saturday in May. Hag Lake just has approved a fishing competition for that same day. The fishing competition doesn't start until 10.
10, I think. 10.
Or they start arriving at 10. So we think we might be able to not have as much of a conflict, because most of the runners will be done by then and they'll be on the other side of the river. But he is going to be checking with them. So the question he has is if we want to consider moving the date possibly. we think we'll be okay. It's also the same date as Hippie Chick, but Hippie Chick is now down in Shampooey. And it's not very as many people. It used to be thousands, and now it's a much smaller event. So I don't think we have to worry as much about that. So, but that's what he was talking about, getting to everybody. Okay. And that's all I had. So our next meeting is going to be Tuesday, February 10th. Anybody else have anything for the good of the order? All right. Thank you all for coming. I will say we are adjourned. And thank you so much. I look forward to working with all of you again in the coming year.
Thank you all. Good night.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.